If you've got Bibles, you might like to turn up to Deuteronomy. I'm going to be skipping around to lots of places today because we missed last Sunday, and it was supposedly the introduction to Deuteronomy. So I've blended two sermons together this morning, and I'll be jumping around a bit. It's interesting, as we were singing that lovely song, it's to remind us, and we were to have communion last Sunday before we looked at this passage, the reminder of what Jesus has done. In a sense, it relates very well to what Deuteronomy is about, because Moses is reminding the people about what God had done for them. There's a link there between the two. Now, as Susan read that passage from Deuteronomy, how many of you thought about Deuteronomy, or was it familiar because you'd read it in the New Testament? My guess is, I'll get you to put your hands up. How many of you would have thought of the New Testament first? Most of you thought of the Deuteronomy. It's marvellous if you do, because it's an Old Testament passage which many of you, I don't think, would have read regularly. I may be wrong. It wasn't one that I'd read regularly. And then, in the end of last year, I had a devotions that took me through the whole of Deuteronomy. And suddenly it came alive to me because it reminded me of things in the New Testament. There are an incredible number of messages there that link to the New Testament. But that's not what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to talk about love the Lord your God, chapter 6. But really, I'm going to give you a bit of background as I go as well. The Shema, as it's called by the Israelites, is the daily prayer that they say daily, what we've just had read out to us. Shema in Hebrew means listen. Listen and respond is the idea of the word. And you hear that in the first, or in verse 3, I think it is, in chapter 6. Hear, Israel, and be careful to obey, so that it may go well with you. Hear and respond. Then you hear it again in the next verse. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, etc. So two statements: hear or listen and obey, listen and love. Moses is talking to who? To the people that have been wandering around in the wilderness for 40 years with him. So let's take a step backwards and, let's imagine, if we like, you're with Moses standing to the east of Canaan, the Promised Land. You're looking out over the land that God had promised Israel. And you are saying, I have to communicate to these people who have been with me for 40 years some important truths. So if you can get your head into that situation, that's where you are. It's about 1400 BC. This is the first sermon on the 40th year, the 11th month and the first day of that month. That's there in details in the scriptures, if you go back to chapter 1. Remember who the only two left of the original guys that saw the 10 Commandments? Caleb and Joshua, and I guess Moses. The rest of them had died out on that 40 years. So Moses is talking to a group of God's people who hadn't seen the miracles of the Exodus from slavery. If you keep going through Deuteronomy, it's a call to obedience. It's a call to be faithful to the God who had been faithful to them. And it's a call to choose. And down in chapter 30, which you'll get to later on sometime, in this series, maybe. I can't remember whether we talk about chapter 30 or not. We're just picking snippets from it. But in chapter 30 it says, I have set before you life and death, blessing and cursing. Choose life. And that's life with God. Now, let's get a bit more of the picture of Deuteronomy itself. It's written in the form of a vassal or a covenant treaty. So in the age in which it's written, treaties between nations were made, or even between people were made. Usually, well, sometimes equal power, sometimes a very powerful one and a minor one, and that's the vassal type idea. We know that type of picture from Assyria and Israel. Israel, the weaker, Assyria, the stronger. We see those types of patterns emerging all the time. In this case, it's an agreement between God and Israel. Now, as I thought about that, it's a very one-way agreement. There's no advantage to God in this. All the advantage is for Israel. It's grace in the real form. God is showing grace to Israel. There's no reason for him to come to this agreement, but he's showing grace in the agreement. And if you want to go through Deuteronomy itself, as I've given you the picture there, first of all is the introduction, a bit of history. Then there's a big chunk of the stipulations of what the covenant agreement was. Then there's a bit about the cursings if you don't keep the covenant, and the blessings if you do. And then there's a few final comments from Moses about his successor and so on. So that's the agreement that's there, and that's the pattern if you want to work through it and look at Deuteronomy in terms of its structure. There's also lots of things about obedience, and Moses sets out a whole lot of good reasons why they should keep the covenant. There's a couple that's kind of struck me as I read through it. One is, if you're following God carefully, you'll be a witness to the nations around you. You'll be a model to them. If you obey God, and you show an understanding of who he really is and how personal he is. If you obey God, you'll pass on, through your witness, that knowledge to other generations after you. There's three. There's many more. But there's this sense of obey God and things will go well with you. As I said, Moses is speaking to a new generation of people, of God's people. They've been wandering around in the desert. They've experienced God's care and provision. The manna, for example. Now Moses says to them, we're on the verge of going in to be settled in the promised land. And you have a choice. And it's a pretty stark choice, really. The choice is your way or God's way. Yahweh. Way. You make that choice. The implications are pretty clear. Well, are they? What are the implications for choosing your way versus God's way? Moses sets it out in a sermon for you. Let's go back, take a step back and say, well, what's in the first 4 chapters? In the first 4 chapters, Moses reminds them about the Exodus and says, well, you know what happened to your forefathers when they rebelled? They came out of slavery, they rebelled. God was going to destroy them and start again, but in his grace he didn't. My advice to you now, guys, follow God's guidelines. That's why I chose the picture I chose, the map. God's map of how to live, that you may have life. What life is really all about. That's what he's saying. The alternative? if you don't obey, then you'll be scattered. I don't know how many of you remember, but Chris a few Sundays ago introduced that idea, the scattering. That's what would happen if you don't obey. Back in Exodus, God had said fairly clearly what the covenant required of them and what the implications were if they did obey. Let me read out just chapter 9 of Exodus, verse 5. Now if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all the nations you will be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, in other words, I don't need to do this, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. That was God's plan, if they kept his covenant. So Moses is setting out for them the idea that what has been in the past, this is the history, this is what has gone on. God has been faithful to you, you need to be faithful to him, and he set out the implications. And that's what he does in the first four chapters. Then in chapter 5, which was what I was going to preach about last Sunday, he takes us to the familiar statements of the Ten Commandments. And he says, here are the 10 Commandments. And he says pretty clearly to them, learn them and follow them. Don't do it tomorrow, do it today, immediately. That's his instruction. These are important. These are the guidelines for a best relationship between you and God and between you and the people you're going to mix with. If you listen to these, if you keep these, then you will live long and prosper in the land. And I don't think the prosper means get wealthy. I think the prosper means for your own well-being. The God who gave those instructions is the God who calls himself the Lord your God who saved you. He has every right to give the instruction. It's interesting, as Susan read the second passage this morning, we're well aware of the fact that Jesus also was conscious of this Deuteronomy passage. In fact, he quoted it rather than the Exodus instructions of the Ten Commandments. Jesus was also very aware of the fact that these instructions were for life, for himself and his followers. Let me just read an extract from the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 5. Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter, not the least stroke of a pen will be any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished. Jesus came to fulfill the law. What's that mean? Is he saying it's not important? He's saying it's vitally important. Does that mean we have to do it? What he said was, I will fulfill. He fulfilled the law. He was the only perfect man who could fulfill the law. But we'll come on a bit later on. We know that we can through his help. The other thing that passage highlights is the fact that Jesus also said it's not the letter of the law, it's the spirit of the law that's important. But again, I haven't got time to go there. Talk to me later about that. Jesus and the ideas in this passage from Deuteronomy, God's people are responding to God's grace and holiness, and they're reflecting the love of God for people around them. Response to God's grace and holiness, the covenant agreement. What was the agreement that God had between Israel and himself? I am the Lord your God, brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery, showing love to thousands of generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. God is promising salvation and his love and care. That's his part of the covenant agreement. How should we respond? He has no need to do that. This is what Moses is telling the Israelites, but he's also telling us right now. I have no need to do this, but in grace I do. Question is, to the Israelites, how do you respond? Question is to you, how do you respond to God's grace? And I've put there at the bottom, his people should remain faithful and express love for him in obedience. And I've asked the question, can they do it? Do they do it? The answer is, well, not really. Can we do it? Can we show love and obedience? The answer is, yes, we can. Because Christ has fulfilled the law, and we can take on the power of Christ in our own lives. The other part of that is to reflect God's love. And if you look at the Ten Commandments and you look at the last 6, Jesus sums them up as, anybody know? Love your neighbour as yourself. It's the things that we do very much. One is loving God, the other is loving your neighbour. So a reflection of God's love is the second part of what Moses is talking to the Israelites. God's love means that keeping the law is in fact creating the well-being for your community. In one commentary I came across a statement which summarised the last 6 commandments. I found it really helpful. I'm going to share it with you, just as a way of thinking about the 10 Commandments in a different way. I won't ask you to list what those 6 are. Let me go through them. Don't rob people of a stable society. That's the father and mother bit. Don't rob people of life. That's the murder bit. Don't rob people of home and honour. That's the adultery bit. Don't rob people of property. That's the stealing bit. Don't rob people of a good name. That's the false witness bit. And don't rob people of contentment. That's the coveting bit. Okay, so in effect, that's the instructions which the Israelites were given. I figure that's the instructions which Jesus develops in the Sermon on the Mount. So they've given to us as well. We've got a daily lifestyle choice, if you like. And it's a lifestyle that responds to God's grace by living out those 10 Commandments. But as I've said, Jesus' love and obedience fulfilled the law, and therefore he can give us the strength to fulfill it as well on a daily basis. And if you want to go back to the Exodus passage, we can be a kingdom of priests representing him. That's the idea. Now let's get to chapter 6. That's the introduction, by the way. How much? Yeah, okay. Chapter 6, the Shema, the greatest commandment. Hear, listen and obey. Hear, listen and love. That's the message that we begin with. And we heard Jesus' instructions that kind of developed from that. He saw it as vitally important So it was love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. You'll notice it's slightly different to the Deuteronomy one, by the way, but we won't go there either. There's slightly different wording that Jesus used when he quoted it. There is no greater commandment than these two. So why is loving and obeying put together? Why are both mentioned together? Why is Moses linking them? Well, let's go through, and I think probably if I was to have anything I want you to take home, it's these 3 points. First of all, Moses points out one Lord. And the word there, Yahweh, is the word that Hebrews will not say. This is the Lord, not the name of God. They won't say that's too sacred. This is a personal God. This is a God who you can know. This is a God who you can speak to, who you can relate to. This is a God who you can love. A personal God, one God. Now, society might get a bit of a shock because they're happy to have a number of gods, depending on the individual. Choose who you like is almost the way our society works, almost like the way the world works. Here, it's very clear. And to the Israelites, it was also very clear because the nations that they were moving through, the nations that they would overtake, had many gods. This is a following of one God only. How do you love that God? You love that God with all your heart. Now, in Hebrew terms, heart, it's actually up here. Okay, so emotions are down here. Mind is up here. That's the kind of concept. When you do a bit of tweaking to the way you think about things. So, love the Lord your God with all your heart means loyalty, commitment, faithfulness, obedience, decision making. Your thought life. That's what Moses is saying to these people. He's saying, if you love God, love him with all your mind, your thought life, the way you see things. And keep in mind Jesus' statement, just to come back to the New Testament. In John chapter 14, Jesus says, if you love me, you will keep my commandments. This is a love which is a personal response to the Lord, to the one God. It's a heart response, but it's also a soul response. And my interpretation of soul is every part of me, my whole life. The central focus of everything I do is love for God. And that will be expressed in love for my neighbour as well. And there's a last part to that passage, what heart, soul, and with all my strength. What's that mean? Well, according to everything I can read, strength means very much. Okay? Overflowing with your heart response, your soul response to God is one which is very much overwhelming desire, if you like. Interestingly, as we love God, The next part of the Shema actually spells out things about the process of how we do it. These commandments I'll give you today that are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the doorframes of your houses and on your gates. It's a very practical instruction. It's a very practical instruction of how expressions of your love for God is shown in the world you live in. There's the daily decisions. There's daily decisions of your heart. The mention of mind, okay? The decisions you make daily need to reflect your love for God. Your family interactions, impress on your children. Talk about them when you sit down at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. In family interactions, impress and talk. Impress on your children. That doesn't mean browbeat them, but it means model for them. Impress them with the knowledge that God and love for God is the top priority in their lives. But it's also about talking. It's talking with one another about what God has done and what God can do for you. I expanded a bit and said it's not just a nuclear family, which we tend to talk about. This is about the family of God. Talk together about the goodness of God. At home, when you walk along the road with your friends, share your knowledge of God's love for you. The third one, tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. You'll notice the symbol I've put up there. Some of you are familiar with it. The Jews take that literally and put the words in a little box on their forehead. That's really probably taking it too literally. What's it mean? It means that we have every effort to share God's love in what we do and how we do it, and our attitudes to others, and so on. Remember that our lives are not just private, they're public. And that's what the last bit, the gates, mean. The gates are not the gates of your house, that's the gates of the city. This is a public forum. So when it says, write them on the door frames of your house and on your gates, it's saying, make sure God's love is seen and your obedience to God is seen by everyone. That's the message that Moses is putting out there. Let me take a step back just for a moment. Just a personal sharing of the impress bit in family. I don't know about you, but I was fortunate enough to be brought up in a Christian home. And I've been thinking about that passage and thinking what happened for me was that God's love was impressed on me. And I haven't forgotten. I left home when I was 18. And one of the things my mum said to me as I left home, going off to university and who knows where, she said to me, take this verse with you and remember it. It's a verse from Philippians chapter 4 and verse 8. Some of you know it well, probably. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent and praiseworthy, think about such things. That impressed me. 50 plus years later, I still remember it. That's the type of impression of how God's love should touch and be shared. So finally I ask you the question. Moses has been talking to the Israelites here. I'll ask you the question, what does Moses' words have for you and what difference does it make for you this coming week? There's a whole lot of different messages, I'm sure. Every one of you will be thinking about something different. For me, it still comes back to my love for God will be expressed in the way I live my life. And that means that I will not rob people of a stable society. I won't rob people of life. I won't rob people of home and honour. I won't rob them of their property. I won't rob them of their good name or contentment. I'll try to live in God's strength in a way which will show them I love and obey my Saviour. That's Moses' message to the Israelites. He leaves them with a message, and if you want to go on in chapter 6, there's a warning there from Moses. We won't get to it in the sermon series, but you might like to finish chapter 6 and see what the warning was. Caution. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you for the wonderful words of Moses that you gave him so long ago. Thank you that Jesus took those words and quoted them back to us so that we could see their importance, could recognise, Lord, how much you love us and your request that we love and obey you. Help us to do that through the strength of your Spirit, we ask in Jesus' name.